And then please enjoy the first panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to the organizers and to the speakers and the audience today. It's a pleasure to be here. We don't have a lot of time, so let's try to start immediately. I'd like to first make a quick introduction of the speakers, and I'll try to make this a little bit interactive also with the audience. So maybe if you can present yourselves, starting with Piotr.
Hi, hello. I represent the advisory company from Poland, and we are engaged in a lot of corporate PPAs process, so on, so on. So it will be a pleasure to share my experience.
Great. Daniel?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Daniel Pescher, my name. I work for MK Solar Europe. We are a pan-European independent power producer for large-scale solar, active in Germany and Netherlands and in the United Kingdom currently. And my role is to basically secure long-term PPAs for our projects in these jurisdictions.
Hello, my name is Jan Knebe. I'm heading the Department for Origination at Enerpark, Sonic Lighthouse. I represent the role as a project developer in an IPP, as well as we have an in-house trading company, so we do mainly trade our assets and or negotiating the PPAs. That perspective into that.
Yeah, I'm Roberto. Hi everyone, Roberto Pizzeri my name. I work for Galileo, pan-European developer of wind, solar, and battery projects. And I'm head of the origination team for PPAs, so negotiating PPAs with corporate and utilities for a lot of projects that are not under subsidy schemes.
Okay, and just to know quickly a little bit of the audience, can you raise your hands if you come from if you are based in Germany? Just to okay, that's a good representation. Rest of Europe. Okay. And rest of the world? Okay, that's majority German, I'd say. And industry-wise, who is representing producers? Okay, that's okay. Corporates? Potential buyers? Okay, no. Okay. Government? Okay. Equipment manufacturers? More finance, okay, that's a little bit advisors or others. Obviously, others has to be a big sum here. What am I missing? I mean, sorry. Okay. Well, okay. Just to try to tailor to the audience interests, but okay. So, I mean, clearly, we have an unprecedented demand for renewable energy. There's many projects facing challenges and delays around grid access, regulatory bottlenecks, global supply chain concerns. The spotlight is securing PPAs, as we heard just in the brief introductions, both for energy producers and consumers. There's a huge interest. So let's start with some general introductions to PPA. So what are the key considerations for developers and off-takers looking for solar or wind PPAs, and specifically for energy-intensive corporations? What are the advantages of procuring renewable energy? Maybe you guys start, Piotr?
Of course, thank you for this question. Of course, off-takers and producers want to enter into long-term contract because they want to secure, producer want to secure his revenue, and the buyers, off-takers want to secure his cost and budget, and both parties want to safety contract and bring it to the end, but they have a quite different reason because producer want to, as I said, secure his revenue, so they want to achieve high prices, and they want to achieve stable partner. It is very important in corporate PPA and long-term contracts. But in the other hand, producer want lower prices than the market, and want to, of course, stable partner and guarantee of delivery the energy. But mostly they want to buy cheap and green energy. So it is the mainly two drivers. Of course, we have to work and prepare such option and such contract where we can match both sides' expectation and based on good terms for off-takers and producer. So I think it is that is the main drivers for off-takers and producer who are looking for long-term contract.
Okay, and anyone wants to add? Maybe Robert or
Yeah, maybe I put some emphasis on the demand side. As we had the demand for green energy was on the retail side, but it's going down the value chain. So we have, if for instance, a medicine producer is tendering for his products to sell it, it's mandatory in this tendering to have green energy. So there's a real demand. So really have to. We see this on several industries. We see a disruption industry, for instance, in glass industry, as they change from heating the melting the glass with gas from reduction heat. So there's a really disrupting change due to the latest event in Europe. And price-wise, renewables, they have the strong advantage that we as a producer can sell for a long term, for 10 years, and we can somehow flatten the curve, so to speak. The front years are expensive, but we can average the price over the next 10 years. So this is really in the interest of the off-taker.
Yeah, one dimension I would like to add on top of the economic dimension, what we see is also the sustainability dimension. You touched on it, but we've seen before the targets of a country like Germany when they want to be net zero, 100% renewable energy. There is more and more corporates that have more ambitious targets. So they want to be 100% renewable energy supplied by 2025, 2030. And that by definition will lead to a shortage in renewable energy. So by entering a PPA, I believe corporates can really secure the supply of renewable energy for their own commitments towards their investors and their customers. So I believe that's a tool that is valuable to them. We have seen what happened last year with the spike in guaranteed origin prices, for example. That happened for a reason. So it's not just, it's the economics, of course, hedging energy costs, but also delivering on other commitments that are important for corporates.
So let's talk a little bit about government intervention, because obviously electricity is a highly regulated sector in all countries, including Germany. We see price caps, we see government auctions. So maybe for Daniel, is government auctions helping, or are they distorting the market? And is regulation an enabler or a deterrent to PPAs?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, and relating to official auctions for subsidy regimes, as we see them here in Germany, for example, in the EEG, where auctions are now mandatory for all large-scale projects, solar, but also other technologies. In my opinion, I think they are definitely a great help, but it depends a lot on how the auction scheme is actually designed by the regulator. And there we have a wide variety of different auction schemes across Europe. maybe as today is a focus on Germany, I would like to emphasize that the German auction scheme is actually a very favorable scheme for PPAs, because basically what it is, as has also been highlighted in the beginning, it's a one-sided premium scheme. That means basically if the market price is higher than the subsidy amount, then the producer can keep the upside. If it's lower, then the regulator fills up to the tariff. So this is obviously a great element which can also be combined very efficiently with PPAs. So basically what can be done is the producer can sign a PPA for corporate at a fixed price, which is ideally higher than the price of the auction. But then basically the auction builds a floor price for the solution. And this is great for achieving project finance, because basically if, for whatever reason, the off-taker during the lifetime of the PPA, which could sometimes be 10 or 15 years or even longer, defaults, then the producer can go back into the subsidy scheme, claim the subsidies, and at least make a minimal return on the project. And that is obviously very helpful for achieving project finance. There's other countries like, for example, Netherlands, where we have also very similar subsidy schemes, which are a great element to combine with PPAs, and where we have seen several transactions over the last couple of years already. But then in other markets, like for example the Nordics, where we don't have subsidy schemes anymore, like in Spain, there obviously it's a different story. So I think we really need to look into the details of each market. And perhaps one last word, looking into the future, obviously we're all aware that the European Commission here is trying to go more into the direction of two-sided CFDs as mandatory element for official support. So that obviously would mean that the producer cannot keep the upside from the market if the market price is higher than the subsidy tariff. And that obviously would be quite an issue for a long-term fixed price PPA. But also, again, this is on the agenda of the EU, so that there is basically the producer can choose between either having a CFD or going to the market, procure a PPA, and ideally even get a credit support element from the regulator to kind of ensure default risk of the off-taker, which again is then a great element to make it a bankable project.
Great. Anybody wants to add? I think it was.
Yeah, just one comment that we've seen this gap in Germany, which now done. Was half a year, which really lead to an almost full stop in PPA negotiation, because this great security uncertainty is a killer for PPA. That's
Okay. Looking at the typology of the off-taker, I mean, obviously we hear about corporate PPAs, utility PPAs. So from a developer's point of view, what are the differences between these two options, and in which situations is one better than another? Maybe if you can start, Jan, and I think probably.
okay. Yeah, so basically, if we are reaching out for the market, just asking people who wants to buy a PPA from Enerpower, there are utilities who more or less buy the PPA and sell it to customers in full tranche or in some slices, however. And then on the other hand, you have off-takers who are interested in the actual energy because they need energy. So that's the difference, and there's a lot of pros and cons on both sides. Personally, I prefer the off-takers, which actually needs the energy, because they have an interest on buying it. Actually, not that volatile price-wise. It's a little difficult because normally they are not that bankable, so this leads to an issue with bankability. If we're entering the small segment, we've done all the Amazon and Facebooks, and now we're drilling down into the market of the SMEs. So that's the cake is getting smaller, so to speak. And of course, then we need mechanism. Everybody has to move in a sense of making it bankable. On the other hand, utilities, they have a more access to the market. They have a range of a variety of potential customers, and they often take bigger volumes. Actually, they take it in whole, like 100 or 200 megs, an issue, where some off-takers start considering if the actual production of an asset is exceeding their demand and back and forth, so you have this discussion. So that's two sides for off-takers and utilities.
You want to add, Robert?
Yeah, I also think everything leads back to what you said at the beginning. So a utility resells the energy, and normally they have a mandate to hedge whatever PPA they enter into. That leads to less flexibility on their side and less capability to enter into very long-term deals, especially if the project is not ready to build money. Maybe as a COD in 2027, for example. You add 10 years to that, you get to 2036. That might be complex for a utility, but if you have a ready-to-build project, a utility has a few advantages, in my opinion. So energy is their core business, so it's much easier to negotiate a contract. Most of them are large bankable companies, so project financing is easier. And if you don't need a very long tenure, they can normally offer an interesting price. On the other hand, corporates, in my opinion, have the advantage of being, they don't have to hedge back. They are by nature short, so that means if, for example, your project has uncertain COD, they are more flexible. They don't ask for the same kind of penalties in case you are 2-3 months in delay, for example. There is ways to manage that risk, but I think it depends really project by project. What do you need at that moment? You can extract more value from that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. We usually think of PPAs as, before construction to get financing in place, etc. So what about PPAs for existing assets? For example, in Germany, the post-EEG. I mean, is there differences with the pre-construction PPAs, and what are the advantages for off-takers? Maybe if you want to start, Roberto, with this one.
Yeah, I can say a few things about it. Maybe you get more assets in Germany and experience, but I've worked a bit on that as well. So it is let's say, rather new trend since a couple of years as more and more assets get out of the EEG scheme. So a market is born for that. I believe it's an interesting market for some corporates that are not too sensitive to additionality, for example, as a topic, and as well for utilities, it's a great market. For the developers, it's questionable whether that makes sense or not. I would rather take the risk than go merchant, if I could, once the asset is paid back. But, maybe you guys have a different opinion of that. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to add on that, we have to distinguish really between the technologies here, because obviously after 20 years of EEG in Germany, some of the assets are quite old. And depending on the technology used back then, they are either going to run another 10 or 20 years, or they're going to break down in the next year or two. So obviously, as a seller, you have to be very cautious here to enter into long-term transactions after a year for an asset which is already 20 years old. Because if it breaks down, then the seller might have to pay penalties to the off-takers for non-delivery. So this is something that really needs to be looked into. For solar in general, there shouldn't be a big issue, because obviously the wear of wind turbine blades is much higher during 20 years than there would be, let's say, wear on the solar.
Jan?
We hold 2,500 megs of solar, and for us, we have 1,000 megs on PPAs, and most of it actually is in the scheme what Daniel described there, where we feed in team and we can are free to opt out for 1 month or 5 years, whatever, and opt in back. So this is a really very favorable situation, and especially as the frontiers are quite high price-wise, it makes sense to leave the subsidy scheme for some years, 3 years, and just 5 years. And the PPA, definitely is way easier as you don't have to run all through this banking direct agreement approval process with more parties and takers. They have several mandates. Tenor-wise, it's way easier to go for 3 or 5 years PPA than for 10 or 15 years because steps. So for us, at least in Germany, it's a very favorable situation. For instance, in France, if you leave the feeling, you leave it once and leave it forever. So it's not that. So that's always dependent, as we mentioned before, on the actual scheme the country is running. Or if you have a feeling at all.
Great. Okay. I mean, looking at the electricity markets in Europe, I mean, we have lived quite a few interesting years lately. I mean, you would probably look at before the pandemic, the Ukraine war, the deep initial dip in the prices in the pandemic because of low demand, and then suddenly because of gas prices, Ukraine war, then cap prices. So there's been quite a bit of turmoil in the markets, and there's like different sort of periods. So how is this affecting the PPA market, Björn?
Oh, last year isn't easy, and it was a really difficult situation for whole market, corporate PPA. If you have in mind long-term contract, but it impacts mid-term and short-term contract too. Of course, when we have the maximum price and the highest historical highest price in last year, in Poland we have huge demand for corporate PPAs from the off-taker sides, and they want to rush with it and push the negotiation. But as Jan says, after new regulation and after cap for revenue for renewable sources, a lot of negotiation process are freezing or stop or break down. So at the moment, the market stays stable for the moment, but off-takers, I can say, wake up for this waiting and try to get back negotiation process and maybe achieve lower prices, so on. But it was really difficult situation. As I know, several contracts have some clauses where both parties can stop realize that's long-term contract and wait for more stable situation. So it is some option for long-term contract when we don't know what will happen in the future. But of course, market and long-term contract wants stable situation. So it isn't easy for corporates, and as I said, a lot of process was stopped and terminated.
You are referring to kind of market disruption or force majeure clauses, or is it something? Because my question is, if it's not one of these events, how bankable would that situation be where the PPA is basically suspended?
Situation isn't included in force majeure or so on. But if you put into your contract the right clauses and you have agree other sides, you can stop the settlement and stop realize that contract, freezing the situation and wait for more stable market. Because if you put losses into one of party in your long-term contract, next year or after 2 or 3 years, they will back to you and try to terminate the whole agreement. So it isn't a good solution for anyone, in my opinion, of course.
Yes, Daniel.
Maybe just to add something a bit more positive on the whole situation. I mean, obviously, now with the energy crisis that we went through and that we are sort of still in, I mean, the topic energy is now on everyone's agenda, and it's not very at the bottom, it's at the top. It's the most important item to look at for many energy intensive consumers, but in general for the whole industry. And I think this is also something good because before the crisis, PPAs were something, a few front runners, tech companies were signing PPAs because they needed green, they wanted to go green. But now everyone thinks about the benefits of a PPA. And this is obviously having long-term price stability, being able to hedge, and at the same time buying additional green power. So I think this is in general something very positive for the market.
Yes, I completely agree because at the moment off-takers look at maximum and minimum scenario and make some stress test how the budgets will look like if they have higher price in the market or lower, so on.
So renewables really come into the industry, and I've been in the industry for some years, and it was always a kind of like, it's expensive, but it's green. Now it's it's cheap and it's green, so that's really very good that the LCOE or the market price exceeds the LCOE cost. So we are really, at least talking for solar, only solar talking with so this is really into a business model and just the normal way to source energy, and everybody's at least discussing this topic. If they buy, that's another point, but there are many. The market is very bullish.
Okay. One of the other difficulties in general when we speak about renewable energy is basically the permitting, the grid connection. It's not uncommon to say in a right way to have delays in construction, in connection. So usually off-takers want fixed delivery dates because really, so some of them are actually going to the market and hedging these positions. If not, corporates obviously want a sort of a certainty about when the delivery date will start. So how is this affecting the PPAs, Daniel?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. And as you said already, Jaime, I mean, it really depends on the type of the off-taker. So in general, in utility PPAs or in PPAs with trading houses, they're obviously the buyer hedges the volumes on the market or hedges it in a downstream contract with a corporate off-taker. So obviously they need certainty that in a certain period of time the delivery of the project starts. Whereas if there is a contract directly between, let's say, a producer and a corporate, then I think there is a bit more flexibility. Because obviously the corporate also wants to hedge their demand. They want to know the power prices of tomorrow. They want to take advantage of a long-term low and flat price instead of the volatility on the power market that they see currently. But they have a bit more flexibility when it comes to delivery times, and the problem might not be as dramatic in terms of penalties. The second point, I think, in general, depends on each contract, and this is obviously up to be negotiated because there is no standard contract yet in the market. How are penalties going to be calculated? And I think there's a multitude of ways, and everyone here on the stage has seen different PPAs with different ways to calculate the delay penalty. So you can do it as a mark-to-market, where you basically benchmark the fixed price against the spot price. You can do it as a fixed penalty for each day of delay. You can do it directly as a termination right. There's many ways to do it. Obviously, it really depends on which way you decide for and what kind of risk that ultimately presents to the PPA and to the project. And maybe one way to mitigate this, and this is something that we see very often nowadays in the market, is basically decoupling the project COD, commercial operations date, from the PPA start date. Basically meaning that PPA does only start a certain amount of months or even years after the expected COD of the project. Because by that way, basically, what happens is that even in case of a delay, because major grid equipment cannot be delivered, or modules cannot be delivered, or there is an issue on the permitting side, even then, basically, the project only loses some upfront months or years of merchant revenues, which could also become an issue, but not as drastic as a delay penalty. So that obviously is one instrument to mitigate. The other instrument, maybe just to add on that, was what Jan has already said before, is, as we have it in some markets in Europe, like Germany, the Netherlands, where we basically can just build the project with a subsidy scheme in place, with a subsidy tariff in place, and once the project is operational, then we can go and design PPAs on top of the subsidy scheme for a short period of time.
Okay, Jan?
Yeah, at least that what German project developers needs to learn, that the feed-in just don't care about commissioning or start date, but the PPA start date is a PPA start date. One more point to add: if we're facing as a project developer a lot of grid restraints or connection issues and all sorts of problems in actual project development, but the character of renewables is regional, and we really have projects where we have a corporate offtaker in the region, which is big company, and he's pulling as well for the energy, because he wants the energy from that side, and he helps on the permissioning and all things on the whole permissioning process. So he's pulling as well. So everybody needs to pull that in the end the solar wind is coming. So that's what we at least utilize in our company.
I think that's a very important point. Also, to the first question, it's a bilateral benefit. I think I've been working on the off-taker side before as well. Sometimes it's a big energy consumer who wants to build a new plant, a new data center. You encounter a lot of opposition, but if you say we help these wind solar projects in your area coming up, those bring down the prices, help the renewable energy targets and so on. So the regulatory political side is more keen to help you through the permitting process of both the energy plant and the industrial plant.
Okay. Jan, what would be the success factors for PPA negotiations?
Yeah, so even though of course everybody will say price, low price or high price, depending on which side you are. But from my experience from negotiation of a lot of PPAs, in the end there are many people or parties involved, like banks, like project developers, advisories, off-takers, everybody, and I haven't seen a single PPA which just runs smoothly from the start to the end. So at all points something shows up you never expected, to be honest. And then it's not, everybody's talking about standardization and digitalization, and so I haven't seen this. So it takes 3 or 4 months or even more to negotiate PPA, especially if banks are involved and legal advisors and everybody. So and that's my key message. If we want to, in the end, we want the solar or the off-taker having the solar asset who's delivering to the off-taker. If that's the goal, everybody has to work for this and find a solution. And to be honest, at some point, trust is also the key word in the PPA negotiation.
So Roberto, we've heard before about the battery storage. Well, it's not the only storage possibility, but it's certainly the most common, especially for sort of daily charge and discharge cycles. We do have a panel later on also on the storage, but from a PPA point of view, what are the challenges? And is it possible to have a PPA with battery storage, and possibly whether it's co-located or standalone might be also probably different?
And I think, first of all, there is more and more demand for, let's say, base load profiles out of purely renewable energy projects with batteries. I think one challenge is whether you deal with a so-called virtual or physical PPA. So how you actually deliver the energy and to whom, and what price. So because that influences how you manage the battery. In general, in the end, it all leads to a commitment on a fixed volume that has to be delivered, so on a shape or profile. We are at the moment negotiating a couple of those PPAs, but I'll be honest, we haven't managed yet to find an agreement with the counterpart on all the terms. So I see some complication related to especially the management of the battery, like in theory to optimize economically the PPA and the profile, you should operate the battery in a way that conflicts with the guarantees of the performance of the battery, the number of cycles, the number of the completeness of the cycle, and so on. So this is the biggest challenge, but I think someone here has managed to negotiate such PPAs. So,
Yeah, we have a solar hybrid PPA, so meaning we're selling annual base load towards the off-taker. There's 35 megs solar plant with a battery. To be honest, the impact of the not to mention this, but the impact of the storages is, let me call it, limited, as we cover some 2 or max 3 hours, and on an annual basis you have to deliver throughout the night, so you cannot charge it the day to actually supply at night or fulfill your demand on the off-taker side. So, but we're getting there. We are learning to gaining experience on trading batteries, which is mainly in the short-term trading actually. So for back and forth trading, quarter hours something. That's the main impact. But I think it's very important to level up and scale up the batteries, flexible demands and management.
Great. So I think we're doing well with time. I'd like to ask if there's any questions from the audience at this point. Any doubts that you may
I
have?
think there's a microphone, so.
Thank you very much for sharing. Most of the talking points are related to large utility scale projects. What's your opinion on the PPA for smaller projects, particularly distributed assets?
Okay, so you're talking about distributed rates as in self-consumption or just the small,
The smaller projects, because all the things we talk about here, let's say we have an option to use merchant revenue, still make the project bankable. However, this probably is not an option for smaller projects. Ballpark less than 10 megawatt or less than 5 megawatt.
I think it's very common to have rooftop solar as much as fits your roof. So it's very easy and you can consume it before the grid point. What we see that, simply speaking, the roof is not big enough. So it's a good starting point for putting this. There are some restraints on the roof as such, and if it's usable. We did some rooftop, but it's not our main business. But normally, it's if you have a big industry, the roof is not covering, generating enough energy. At least our experts.
We also have a subsidiary focusing on that. I believe in countries like Germany, the reason why this hasn't become a huge market, meaning PPAs for rooftop, is reasons. One is often the utilizer of the electricity is not the owner of the building, so he might be gone after 3 years, for example, because he finds a different building for his, production facility or logistics facility, especially, which is easier to move. And the other reason is really once you go into this rooftop business, you have only one possible off-taker, which is the company on site. Whereas with a utility scale project, even if you have PPA, after 3 years, say the buyer terminates the contract or you terminate the contract, the plant is still there and you sell it electricity into the market. Worst case, at whatever market level you have for electricity price. On a rooftop, you are much more dependent on the counterparty for, let's say, the 20 years investment, so it's much more complicated.
But don't get me wrong, so I think it makes sense to put on every roof solar. That's very good, and it's a business, and it's easy, and if it's possible, just go for it. We need a lot of energy, so cover all roofs. That's very good, and private households as well.
Currently, if I may add, it makes sense to add on every roof, and very soon, hopefully even on every window, on every facade, with the building integration that is coming on board. But I mean, from experience, but the sister company of my former employee was a leader in rooftop for commercial industrial in the Netherlands. And so basically they taking advantage of the subsidies. They have a huge penetration to supply the consumers. Of course, it has different challenges. Maybe obviously you have to start with the PPA with the off-taker, also the land lease or the surface rights, etc. Grid connection is also a plus if possible, especially after the PPA expires. So I mean, it has its own challenges, but it is a part of the future for sure. Because distributed energy takes advantage of producing where the consumption is, which is very important, alleviates the grids, takes away of the losses, but also hedges the curtailment risks, the price cannibalization, etc., etc. So it's a very good option. So any more questions for the audience?
Okay. So I think, thank you. At the first, we had a very interesting first panel,